Welcome to the Greatness Is Not Need Approval podcast, where I am your host, James Epps Jr. And boy, am I excited to have my guest on today, my guide, Reggie Kee. But before we get into Reggie's impactful story, as always, I have a question for you, the audience. Do you know how great you are? Because you are great. So no matter if people doubt you, no matter if they don't believe in your dreams or your goals, no matter if they can't see your vision, always remember this: your greatness does not need anybody else's approval. Speaking of greatness, my guy, my friend, the do-all-everything, the genius generator himself,
Yes, sir.
Reggie Kee. Do you mind introducing yourself to the people?
Not a problem, man. My name is Reggie Kee. I'm living in the Charlotte area right now. I'm originally from Maryland, though, and I am more than happy to be a guest here, partner with James Epps. We have similar visions, similar desires, similar audiences, so it's a thrill to be here today.
Well, thank you for joining us, Reggie, man. I've been following you. I mean, I see all the great things that you're doing to help support your communities and everything like that. But before you got to doing all these great things that you're doing in the community, as always, I got to find out, like, where did it all start, man? Where did it all begin? How was little Reggie growing up?
Man, how was little Reggie growing? Little Reggie went through a lot of rejection growing up. Though I came from, I came from a household. I had an older sister, and I had a mother and father who were there. For whatever reason, when I was in school from a young age, from like kindergarten, I went through a lot of like I was getting beat up a lot and would come home with black eyes and busted lips and everything. And my parents were like, "Look, you got to defend yourself, right?" And so, I like to describe, outside of my school in that environment, I do want to touch on like how I was raised up in my family. And when I think about it, I wrote a paper when I was in sixth grade that talked about my family, and I called us the Cosby Show with less kids and less commercials. My dad, he wasn't like I don't think he was funny on purpose, but he was just a strict man. But I really looked to him to model wanting to be a father and a husband early. Like in that same paper, as a sixth grader, I was talking about wanting to be a father and wanting to be a husband. So it's something I've been looking forward to for a really long time. And so, we had a lot of love in our household. We had a lot of God in our household, and that definitely still plays out in how I've raised my children and how I try to impact others in the schools and the communities and the organizations that I go and speak in.
And so with that being said, like, because of how you were raised, did you, like, when the kids and stuff would do things to you at school, how did that make you feel? Because you're looking at it like, all right, I'm at home, I'm getting all this love, but at school, like, why these kids treat me like this? What was that like?
I didn't understand it. I went to a private Christian school where I was one of the few Black people. So when you're young, you don't really I really didn't see race until I was maybe in third grade. Actually, it wasn't until in fifth grade I went into public school. And that's when I kind of got the scales removed from my eyes. Like, oh, there's this thing where your skin and my skin aren't the same, and it seems to make a difference. Like for whatever reason, I didn't really concentrate and focus on it in first, second, third, fourth grade. But when I got into public school, like going down the street, like walking to school versus getting bused to school, it was a different world. And so I experienced rejection in two ways. When I was younger, like I said, I don't know what that was. As I got older, I really feel like it was, I'm a minister. So I really feel like it was the enemy trying to take me out early, trying to marginalize me, trying to set me apart early to make sure that I didn't become the person that I'm trying to become today. Because it really didn't make any sense. Why are you getting picked on? Why am I getting picked on in kindergarten? Like who's getting picked on in kindergarten, right? My mom would tell me that the custodian would kind of defend me, and he would give reports to my parents like, yeah, he was getting messed with today or whatever. But when a little switch hit, literally, because my parents were like, hey, look, if you come home with one more black eye, you don't get a spanking. And that's all the motivation I needed. So I remember the custodian one day, he was like, yeah, buddy didn't get messed with today. He put everybody on notice because I ain't want to get that switch, right? And so I developed this early on sense of it's me. I got to kind of knuckle up and put up this wall and kind of be to myself. I didn't knuckle up and fight, but I put up a barrier, and I got really, really quiet. I was an introvert as a kid. And so, I got into heavily reading books and things like that just to kind of escape whatever I was going through at school. Because I was, academically, I was a good student, but it just took me a while to kind of integrate myself within the different school systems. Like by the time I was in middle school, in the public school rather, Now I'm getting picked on because, I'm smart. Now I'm getting picked on because I dress different. Right. And so there was always this thing where I didn't quite belong. But what it did, James, it turned me into this person that was like, I don't need to follow the crowd. Like, I don't need to depend on what everybody else is doing to know who I am. I was forced to figure out who I was and accept who I was at an early age because of the rejection that I experienced from my peers.
And see, that's what's kind of crazy because it sounds like you were dealing with like two different dynamics. So you go to a private school, like you mentioned, like you were one of the only few black kids in the school, and so now you get treated one way at the private school, and maybe you don't notice it as much until you kind of look back on it. But then you go to the public school, and you're kind of outcast because you're smart. Can you tell people like how that dynamic works and how does that make a person kind of feel like in both senses? People talk about and dealing with the imposter syndrome a lot.
Yeah.
How did that work for you at that age, like having to navigate like both, both kind of both ways, both sides of the fence?
It really just made me draw closer to my family. One thing that I feel like at the end of the day, it was the four of us. Like I said, I had an older sister and my parents, and I could retreat to my house and feel safe. And so, that's the thing that I think children now don't get a chance to get away from the bullying because it's virtual now. Like it follows you on social media. You go home and you're not even safe anymore because now, like I said, you pick up your phone and if somebody videotaped or did whatever. I know a young man who a dude went up to him and slapped him in the face and then like put it on Instagram. And now everybody is seeing it. He gets home and he can't get away from it. I was able to get away from it. And so though I didn't understand what I was going through, and I did have days where I teared up and I cried in school and everything, I would come home and that was my sanctuary. That was my safe place where I could still be me, still be accepted. And I just was like, okay, it's my family. That's who it is. Now, eventually, once I got in middle school, I did begin to kind of become my own person and not following the crowd. And I was able to draw friends. But one thing that I did, I told you I didn't knuckle up, but I called myself a wordsmith. And I think it started in a bad place. Like I got really, really crafty at forming words that would puncture and hurt you before you could puncture and hurt me, like physically. And so I was that cat that would roast you to no end. But it was a defense mechanism. It was a way to protect myself and keep people at bay. And I kept that witty tongue for a long time until I started seeing like I'm actually hurting people's feelings though, and I don't like how I feel as I'm hurting people's feelings. And so I turned that ability to use my words against people to now using my words to build people up.
And man, that's great, man, because a lot of people don't really understand that. Like how some bullies become bullies because they were bullied, right? And so you just basically felt like you were backed into a corner and you was like, hey, I'm going to get them before they got me. But you realized that that wasn't you. So what would you tell like a kid that is kind of going through the cycle of what you were going through at that time and who maybe can't go home to a safe space? What would you tell a kid to kind of help them through that process?
I mean, there is I can't not mention God in all of this because if you don't have a safe place to go home to physically, He is your safe place to go home to spiritually. He is a person that you can talk to. Prayer is nothing more than communicating with your Father who's in heaven, having a conversation with Him. How do you get to know that type of father? When I came out with my first book, my son was like 2 or 3 years old. And I pondered this. I said, you know what? What if for whatever reason I'm not in my son's life anymore at the age of 4? How would he get a chance to know who I am? And I was like, what he would have to do is he would have to read my book. And as he read my book, he would see my thoughts. He would see my progressions and he would understand who I am a little more. And in understanding me, he will understand himself a little. And so the correlation is if you want to get a chance to know God as a father, you got to read his book, read the Bible. Right. And I'm not saying, that's not an easy book to read. And so, begin to try to find someone who can help you understand what it is that you're reading in the context of it. Because behind every story, it's a love story of how God is trying to reconcile humanity to him despite sin. And so that's what I would say. That if you don't feel like you have a safe place to go to at home, find your safe place, your sanctuary, through your church, find your safe place and sanctuary in God as a father.
Well, that's man. Hey, man, you dropping some gems already, and we just getting started. But so you talked about like your quick wittiness, and so your stuff kind of got developed, and you always been kind of smart. And so did that where the poetry came from? To where now you're you're like using it in your social environment. So is that where that came from?
Hindsight being 2020, that's where it started. But it wasn't obvious. I wasn't writing poems and things as a kid. I'm a math dude. I love math, right? And so my world was math. Everything was math, math, math. And so it helped when I became a freshman in college. I majored in computer engineering. But here's what happened, James. My freshman year, I took a physics class. I'd never taken physics before, and it knocked me on my tail. I had never been academically defeated so thoroughly before, right? And in that place of abasement, in that place of just a low place that I had never been to before, I got humbled. And I remember I was going to a study hall, and I'm like, I've never needed to go to a study hall. I felt like a complete failure. And in that moment, James, in that low place where I'm like, maybe I chose the wrong major, maybe I'm in the wrong place, maybe this is not going to work out how I thought it was. I started hearing these lines come to me. And it was the beginnings of like my first official poem. And I tell people to this day, I didn't write that poem as much as I dictated. It was dictated to me and I just wrote it down. Because I'm like, what it is, I don't understand. It wasn't like words or time, it was lines at the time. I was 19 years old. And from that day forward, I began to explore like, what is this gift that just got unlocked in me? And so I tell a lot of people, like, sometimes it takes a traumatic experience. It takes you being humble for something to get triggered on the inside of you that you haven't experienced before, that then changes your trajectory. My trajectory was never the same once I experienced that, because now I started to explore what it means to bring your words together, what it means to, I started listening to hip hop a little more. I wasn't a big fan of hip hop growing up, but then I began to consume it because I'm like, how do I nurture this gift that's on the inside of me now? And so I just wrote every day. And then, I started meeting the ladies too, though. And I was like, man, let me, I had my wife, I met her in 1997.
You dropped the one? You dropped the one of them poems?
On her, man. She asked me a question because she was trying to, she said, hey, I ask men specifically questions because I'm trying to get to know their mentality. She called them mental notes. So she asked me one day to get to know me. She was like, if you had to paint a picture of romance, what would you paint? And I was like, wow. And so I said, hey, I can't paint, but I write poetry though. And so I made a poem called Shades of Jade Escapades. Jade is her middle name. And I just let her have it on this poem, man. I was just giving the last line was, and to give me a chance to display such romance, let me be with you and speak your name. I mean, we've been married 20 years, bro.
Bars.
I'm not playing around.
He said he was not playing. He knew what he wanted. Congratulations to Jade. Shout out to Jade. I had that man open.
Yeah.
But
I gotta get it right though. Her middle name is Jade. First name Kee. So I gotta make sure I get my lady.
hey, well, shout out to your lady. Shout out to your lady. So when she sees this, man, 20 years later, man, that's awesome. Marriage is a great thing. I don't think people talk enough about marriage and how important it is, like being with somebody that long, because in society they talk about, like not being promiscuous, not being faithful, but being married. That takes a true gentleman, a true man. So thank you for what you're doing and keeping your family together. All right. But with your writing, you have organized Knights Writers, all right, which focuses on like fostering creative and like youth talent. So where did that come from? What made you like, all right, this is what I'm doing. This is what Reggie is doing right now.
So Knight Writers is KNIGHT WRITERS, but it was a play on one of my favorite shows from my youth, Knight Rider. I don't know if how old you are, James. I don't know if you remember Knight Rider.
I remember Knight Rider.
Shit. You remember that?
I remember Knight Rider.
Okay.
That black car. Yeah, I remember that.
That was sweet though, right?
Yeah,
so
I remember.
It was a play on that. But what it came from was this. My wife and I spent 20 years in Illinois. That's where we started our family. That's where our children were born before we ended up moving down here. And in that time, we were positioned and equipped to help start a church. Not anything that I had ever anticipated, not anything that I ever had a goal of, but long story short, I met a man that changed my life. He was a year older than me, and he knew the word like nobody's business. And I couldn't understand how somebody that was only a year older than me had so much knowledge and understanding of who God is, what his kingdom is relative to me. And I was like, he would ask me questions and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And it kind of motivated me to just really dig into the word. So fast forward, we start this church and we're looking to engage our youth. And I'm like, hey man, like, why don't we host an open mic? And in that open mic, I was like, I know what it feels like. By this time I was a speaker. So I was like, I know what it feels like to get in front of people and feel like whatever you're going to say, people might not be interested, or people, you never really know how people receive you. You know, they might clap politely, but I was like, what we can do with this forum is one thing that our church is big on. It's called the Kingdom Advancement Center. We believe in the manifestation of all the gifts of the Spirit. And the main gift that we operate in when we do Night Riders is prophecy. And prophecy is really edification, exhortation, and comfort. Edifying is building people up. Exhorting them is lifting them up. And comforting is comfort. And so I was like, here's what I want to make different for our open mic, which we call our sets, open mic poetry nights. I was like, look, before a person gets off the stage, I want to be able to give them a word of encouragement that lets them know that they were seen, that lets them know that they were heard, that lets them know that they were appreciated. So they don't have to guess about whether or not they were received well when they get off the stage. And so we began to be very intentional. Everybody that got up there, because, you know, the scripture says, out of the abundance of your heart, your mouth speaks. And so when somebody speaks from the abundance of their heart, you're getting a chance to view what's on their heart. And so when we would hear what was on their hearts about what they were saying, that gave us the ability to then speak what God the Father was saying to them in that moment, how he loved them, how he appreciated them, how he sees them. And man, that took off. Like, we began to get artists and local artists coming through, wanting to get prophesied to. You would see the Spirit of God move, or other people would get up in the audience who weren't necessarily a part of our church. Hey, I hear something too. Can I like encourage this person here? And so we began to then foster different artists in their particular genres, whether they were poets, rappers, dancers. We just began to like cultivate a place. Again, I'm all about sanctuaries and safe places, a place where they could cultivate their craft and get it on a broader stage, and really begin to, like, you know, the expression, the scripture that says iron sharpens iron. We want to be that for the people in the area, the artists in the area. And so that's where Night Riders came from.
Man, and so that's how you connect with the community. And that's thinking outside of the box, because, you know, a lot of times, like in religious settings, like, we don't really connect with the young people right now. Like, we're struggling to really connect with the young people. It's like once they get past the age where their parents are making them go to church,
Right.
like, they kind of are disconnected. And so it's awesome that you have a way of pulling them back in. Now, you also do this workshop based on your book, Common Genes, Uncommon Destiny.
Yes, sir.
And so this is helping unlocking a lot of academic geniuses. And so can you elaborate on the concept and how that empowers youth and young people?
Absolutely. This is my bread and butter right here. This is the lane that I'm in right now. When I go to most schools, do leadership development, whatever, what have you. So the Lord showed me genius in a very specific way one day. And it was interesting how you gather things as you go through life and you don't know what the bigger picture is as to why you have this thing. But a long time ago, when I was working with youth in a different capacity, I would talk about the parable of the talents. And, you know, the main message I had was, don't put your talent in the earth. Because that was the message of the servant who put his talent in the earth when his king came back. Because, you know, just to tell the story real quick, it was a king. Clearly, he's rich. He says, I'm going to go off to another land and I'm going to give some talents, money, to three of his servants. He gave 1 5, 1 2 talents, and 1 1. And these talents are a weight. It wasn't talking about the talent that we talk about now, but it was actually a weight of the type of money that they used, right? And so he was like, I'm going to give 1 5 talents, another 2 talents, and another 1. The ones who got the 5 and the 2 talents, they doubled their talent. And so when the king came back, he was like, well done, thy good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I will make you rule over many. But the last dude that got 1 talent was shook. He was scared. He was like, yo, I know that you are a person that you're a king, you're mighty and you're strong. I didn't know what to do with it. So I just dug a hole and put it in the earth. Here's your dusty talent back. And the king was like, he said, you wicked and slothful servant. And he kicked him out. He was like, you're not in my kingdom anymore. And so I use that to metaphorically tell students and tell young people, hey, don't put your talent in the earth. Like, don't just think that you getting the bag and you making it about you with the talent that you have is enough to let the world consume it, right? And so I asked I always anticipate what my audience may ask me. And so I was like, what if my audience one day asked me, well, how do you multiply your talent? And I was like, I don't have an answer for that. But years later, the Lord said, well, first of all, you know that the talent is not yours, it's mine. That's why you get the phrase God given talent. And so he was like, how you multiply the talent that I put on the inside of you is by recreating it and multiplying it and reproducing it in other people. So that's what night writers became. Hey, you have a talent to write, it's a talent to speak, and a talent to rhyme. So do I. Let me give you a platform and show you how to improve it and make it better. And that's why I'm a publisher now. I'm an author of 6 books, but I don't just publish my books or my family's books. I look for other people who have messages that are encouraging, that are edifying, that are uplifting, and I help them become authors. That's multiplying the talent that's in me in the world. And so I had the talent portion. And so I when I think back to it, there's a dude by the name of Bruce George. I got to give him a shout out. Bruce George one day is the one of the brain, his brainchild is Def Poetry Jam, also Def Comedy Jam too back in the day. And so Def Poetry Jam started off on HBO, but then eventually it moved online, and you could compete online submitting haiku and submitting poetry. And so I won a couple contests through that forum, and he reached out to me one day and was like, yo, salute, I see what you did there, that's good. And so him and I stayed in contact for a long time. Eventually I come to him one day and I'm like, yo, what you doing? I know you're doing something cool, what you doing? He was like, hey, I got this concept that I want to bring to the world called Genius is Common, where I want to take genius from this elite status where only certain people are deemed to be geniuses and make it so that everybody has it. And he was still in New York. By this time I was in Illinois. And I was like, bro, how can I help your movement? He was like, just spread the message out in the Midwest. I said, bet. So as I'm focusing on genius and I'm thinking about talents, Lord showed me 3 components. He was like, you can get people's their non-academic genius if you focus on passion, talent, and purpose. He was like, if you combine those 3 things, you can begin to show people what their genius is. And so passion is about not what you love, but what you hate. What is it that's broken in the world that has traumatized you to the point where you're like, I don't want to see that thing hurting anybody else? Whatever that thing is, that's what you've been put on this planet to deal with, to fix what's broken that has hurt you and traumatized you. And so the logical question is, once you realize, James, like, well, this is what's broken, then I'm going to put my hands on to do something about, but what do I do? Well, when you're at your home, James, and something breaks, what you probably do is you go try and find a tool to fix the thing that's broken. And so I tell people, your tool is your talent. God-given talent that you have that's in your family, because talent is generational. You take that tool, apply it to what's broken. That's going to begin to have you dealing in your passion. And that's, in fact, your purpose, to apply your tool your talent as a tool to what's broken. And in doing so, unlock your genius and improve the environment around you. So I can go into a room. I went into a room today of 15 people. And I asked at the beginning, who in this room consider themselves to be a genius? And they were all business owners. Nobody raised their hand. By the time I finished my presentation, 10 of them had their hands up like, yes, I am a genius. Because it's taking what is foreign to them and making it so that it's personable. Like, this is not about academics. I didn't ask you about your GPA. I don't care about your IQ. You can tap into this no matter what your grades were, because this is what I call trauma-informed genius. What I do, I look for people who are rejected like me, because that's what my trauma was. And I try to make them feel integrated, make them feel like they belong, because I know what it feels like to be pushed to the side and marginalized. And so I focus on those who feel like they don't belong by letting them know, hey, if you know your name, outside of knowing your name, you should know and believe that you're a genius.
Man, so we kind of focus on like a lot of the same things. That's kind of where the show came from. Greatness does not need approval, because what we look at as being great, I remember just growing up, like I used to think that there wasn't greatness around me because of the city that I grew up in, and it really wasn't a lot. But I never even looked at all the teachers who poured into my life. I never even paid attention to the principal and the coaches, and how, even though we have confused what greatness is, like we confuse it sometimes with money and status and things like that. No, like we have everyday people who are doing great things around us, and I agree with you. So that's why I say, like, you are great. Like, everybody's great. They have something that they're great, and something that God has blessed them with, that God-given talent, and that they just haven't manifested in them yet. Like, they just don't believe in it yet. So you have multiple talents. You are now a speaker, but you were an engineer at one point. I mean, so what transition was it to like go from being like an engineer to being a speaker and doing all these great things that you're doing in the community? How does that happen?
Man, field. And 2 years into my field, I got laid off. Nobody tells you when you graduate from college that depending upon who's in office, what president is in office, depending upon how the economy is, you might not have a job. You can have a whole degree and not have a job. I had a whole bachelor's degree in science with computer engineering, and the company that I was working for, I always tell this because I think it's funny. The company I was working for is no longer in existence. It was called Lucent Technologies. It was a spinoff of AT&T Labs, Bell Laboratory. And when I graduated in 2000 and I told people where I was working, they was like, ooh, Lucent. 2 years later, it was, ooh, Lucent? Completely changed. Like the telecommunications industry fell apart and they didn't get ahead of it enough to the point where they just had to start laying people off in droves. And so eventually I got hit with a layoff. It had nothing to do with my skill, had nothing to do with anything that I brought into it. It was just the status of the company and the economy at the time. And so I'm like, out of work for 8 months with a computer engineering degree. Like, nobody told me what I'm supposed to do. Nobody told me that this could even happen to me. So what ended up happening, I think I kind of told you. If I haven't, I'll say it now. I've been a peer mentor like for most of my life. Like when somebody doesn't understand math, since I understand it, I would help them. And so as I got older and I was no longer a teenager, no longer somebody who was in school, I was still reaching back to my community and students and like being a mentor, being an actual tutor, not a peer tutor, but an actual tutor. And so I came across this program called Trio, Upward Bound. And I was like, I just started working part-time. It's just the only thing I could get. But it was in this thing that I love doing. And so that parlayed into me becoming like the Lord closed one door, and unbeknownst to me, he was beginning to change my trajectory and have me where I am now, because I went from being a tutor part-time to working in the financial aid office full-time, where I was helping students and families navigate this money, these numbers, to make sure they could get into school, they stay in school. And then that put me in front of people, because my manager would say, hey, I need you to go talk to this school about financial aid. And he said, and I was a bilingual cat at that. It was like, I need to go talk to this Spanish audience about financial aid. That's like 2 languages in one, Spanish and then financial literacy. And so I got established as a speaker doing that. But then I started saying like, okay, and I started doing workshops for my church, for the church families that were there that had juniors and seniors trying to understand what they were about to get themselves into with financial aid. And so having navigated that launched me into, you know what, I have some other things that I want to talk to people about. If I have their ear, if I have their attention, that could help better their lives. And so that transitioned me from engineering to being a motivational speaker.
Man, and so is that kind of that transition? Is that where you transitioned into like doing the Queen City Kings program? Is that where that came from? Like through all that transition? Where did that come from?
Yeah. So, you know, wherever I am, whatever region I'm in, I changed the title of the program you just mentioned. Here in Queen City, Charlotte, it is called a Queen City King Speech. But when I was in the Fox Valley region of Illinois, I call it Fox Valley King's Speech. And here's what that is. We are all, you know, we talk about greatness being common amongst all of us. We talk about genius being common amongst all of us. The other thing that's common amongst us that we don't all the time see, James, is that we are all rich. But when you got to break down what it means to be rich. What it means to be rich is that you have an abundance of something, anything. Rich, we tend to apply to money, but that's just one type of richness. The type of richness that I try to embrace for our youth is that you are rich in words. I ask people, tell me how many words you know, and they can't count them. And I'm like, if you can't count it, you're rich. But when you think about a king and how they're rich, they can be rich, but they can be a bad king. How a king or queen utilizes their resources determines what type of king they are. A good king will use his resources, his richness, to improve the lives of people around him, to improve the lives of the people who live in this country, right? But a bad king or queen will use all those words, will use all those riches for himself. And so I tell people, if you want to determine how, or young people specifically, if you want to determine what type of king you are, look at how you're spending your resources. How are you using your words? Are you using your words to build up other people, or are you using your words to tear other people down? Are you using your words are you speaking so much that now the worth of your words is low? Because you know you can flood the market and all of a sudden it'll drive down the worth of a thing. And so it's like, be careful in how you speak, when you speak, like be quick to listen and slow to speak, but then also make sure that your words are edifying, building up yourself and others to determine if you're a good king, ruling in the thing that you're rich in, which is your words.
Man, I see where the poetry stuff come from, man. That's that's deep, man. I'm enjoying this interview. Man. You and your wife, it's because it's not just you. So, to anybody who knows, if you're married, anything that you're working in, it's a joint venture. You and your wife are so heavily involved in your community and ministry. So how does that influence like your mission and what you're doing, like daily on a daily basis?
It influences a lot because you mentioned this earlier. Marriage is important. A covenant is nothing more than an agreement. And when I say nothing more, I don't mean to trivialize it. It's important. Like there is her and I being paired together because she is a motivational speaker in her own right. But her and I being paired together makes sure I don't know. I would guess if I had to guess, James, you and I are both kind of in this business owner entrepreneurship type of thing. We launch out. When we get an idea, we chase after that thing until we see it come to pass, right? We put wheels on the vehicle, so to speak. But when I launch out sometimes, James, sometimes I see the vision far off and I launch too far, too quick. My wife is very good at balancing me out and being like, hold on, pump the brakes. Because she's like, I don't know if I'm ready to launch where you're going. And I used to resent that, if I'm honest with you. I'm like, just come along with me for this ride. But now I kind of talk about our pairing like a kite and a string. If a kite doesn't have a string, it's going to be off in the clouds and you're never going to get it back. But that string helps direct it. That string helps ground it. And so that's the balance of a marriage. Like there's always going to be one person who's going to be more so in one vein than the other. And the other person comes in and you are pairing. You match together well. You see how my hands came together? Like where there's a deficit here, this finger comes in and closes that gap. And that's what marriage is. So we're really refocusing this year and making sure that everything that we do, every speaking engagement that I go to is done in such a way that we agree, like this is good or this is not good. We came up with a whole metric system because she's an engineer too. So we both are analytical thinkers. And we're like, we need to come up with a rubric that weighs each opportunity so that I'm not going everywhere like a kite without a string. Because I did that last year. And I was like, that wasn't exactly fruitful. And so I value her input. And it provides a great foundation for our children to now see. I have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old. And for them to see, hey, we're different, but we still are moving this thing together. Like that's important for them. Family is important to me. Shout out to Jermaine Nichols of Greater Works. He's a pastor over there in a church in Fort Mill. He said this past Sunday that a family without purpose is powerless. And so we're trying to build a legacy right now. Both of my children are authors, right, at 7 and 9. And what I'm building for them is a business that if they want it, because I'm not going to force it on them, they could take it and then be able to help people publish their books. I have them on retainer now, where when I finish editing a book, they come through and they come behind me and they edit to make sure what areas did you miss. Like my wife used to do that, but her bandwidth, she can't do it with the job that she has anymore. And so I brought my children on because they're wordsmiths too. They are authors in and of themselves. And so just to be able to provide a foundation for a family based off of this covenant that we have, this agreement, is everything.
And so with that, we can lead into this question. So what is the legacy that you are leaving when you do that with your kids so other people can understand how important it is to leave a legacy for your family? What is the legacy behind that?
At the end of the day, James, the legacy is service. As much as everybody in my house is a published author, we didn't just focus on us. We looked to the community. We looked to our church. We looked to our neighbors and said, what talent do you have? Because there's so many people, James, who have phenomenal stories, phenomenal ideas, but the idea of putting what's in their head into their hands and getting it into the marketplace as a book is intimidating. It seems like a fantasy. And with us being able to do it for everybody in this household, we're like, we want to show other people that our gift is not just for us to consume, to help, like I said earlier, to help multiply the gift in other people. And so that's at the end of the day, right now, my children, they're not really feeling the whole publishing thing. They'll stay on for this retainer and they'll help me when I need, but they're not writing right now any books. They're in theater and they're in band and things like that. But no matter where they go, no matter what industry they're in, I want them to have the legacy of service, helping others, and I want them to have the legacy of kingdom. The kingdom of God is the most important thing. It's what makes us unique. It's what gives us purpose. It's what defines our destiny. And it's what improves the world around us when we embrace it in our lives.
Man, so with this being like we're getting close to the interview. All right, so you've left a legacy. before you leave this earth, what would be like you would want to be your lasting like impact? Like when they talk about Reggie, what would you want people to say before you leave this earth? 50 more years from now. I don't know how old you are. Like I tell people, I don't want to kill you off too early. So hopefully I got you, and hopefully 50 years got you to at least 100. Let's at least get to this.
I'm 46, bro. So yeah, that would get me close to 100.
We got you close to 100. All right, good, good. So what is the last thing like impact that you want to leave?
I have a strong desire to see God's kingdom in his church impact people for the better the way it was meant to. Right now, there's a sense of powerlessness and there's a sense of just we haven't reached the full capacity of what the church was designed to be and destined to be. We've allowed so many things to distract us. And I want the church to be in a better place when I leave this earth than how I found it. I want the church to empower God's people to the point where we are healing those who need healing emotionally, physically, psychologically, are restoring bonds with the Father, right? This is how I started the conversation with us today. If I can say that I have moved the needle more in that direction where people understand their purpose better, where people are walking in how they've been equipped from God, if I can leave a legacy where how I was taught, how I was discipled is now active and operating as someone else who is teaching and discipling and equipping God's people, then I've done my job.
And thank you. And thank you. And you're doing amazing work. So I thank you. Like you've already made an impact, just me hearing you today. And just like I said, from following you on social media, I see the impact that you're doing in your community. So thank you for today, man, being my guest. So before we tell you goodbye, man, even though, cause I would love to talk to you all day, cause we were talking offline and I was like, man, this is my boy. This my guy.
Yes, sir.
So before we let you go, are there any lasting words like you want to say to any inspiring motivational speakers, anybody who's talking about going into ministry, any writers, because you do so much. So I have to call out everything that you do. So any lasting words that you want to leave with them?
Don't be afraid to fail. We tend to want to launch out and do something perfect the first time. And I don't know where we get that from, but that if you can psych yourself out of ever making that first step, if you're trying to make that first step in perfection, you have to start somewhere. And I have an acronym for FAIL, and it's called First Attempt in Learning. If you don't fail, sometimes you're going to end up missing that learning lesson that's going to allow you, even you said it before we started, to fail forward though. As long as you fail forward, it's not a fail. And so just leaving yourself open to make mistakes as you step out in what you're doing, because it's rare that somebody steps out and does a thing well the first time. We want to put our best foot forward, and you will put your best foot forward, even if it's a fail, because guess what happens after that? The next step has to be taken. If babies, when they're learning how to walk, they try to wait until their first step was perfect, none of us will be walking. We will all be crawling. We learned by falling. We took that first step, fell and stumbled, got up. If we could get back to that mentality that we had when we were infants, when we were babies, we weren't embarrassed. We didn't care who was watching. And when we said our first word and it sounded like garbage, right? We didn't care. We just kept going after it until a word became a sentence, and a sentence became a paragraph, and a paragraph became, for some of us. And so just don't be afraid of the fail. Just step out by faith and know that God is already meeting you on the other side in success and in victory and in destiny.
Yeah. You gotta yell for me. I'm trying to be calm. Yeah, I try to be calm on here, but I had to get my if anybody's heard me speak, yeah, I'm always, so yeah. So thank you for that, man. Thank you for that. That motivated me. Hey, you better get that copywritten because I'm about to sample that. I'm like, I'm about to sample that FAIL, man. I'm about to sample that. So at this time, man, I'm going to say thank you to my guest, Reggie Kee. And as always, to my audience, thank you. And just always remember, you are whatever you say you are. If you believe, therefore you are. And you are great. And your greatness doesn't need anybody else's approval. Have a good day.
Salute.